Sobriety isn't about being boring. It's about embracing life to the fullest. And nobody knows that better than my next guest. His name is Mick, and he has the Instagram account at Queer Recovery, where he kicks shame to the curb and wins over alcohol. He's joined you to forget everything you thought you knew about sobriety and help him rewrite the rules. He's saying goodbye to outdated recovery methods and join him in rewriting the script on recovery, one fabulous step at a time. Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stipanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. My guest today is Mick Resendez. Mick is here today to share his personal sobriety story, and he's about to launch a new coaching business for the LGBTQIA community. Welcome, Mick. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jessica. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here today.
I would love for you to take us back and share your personal sobriety story so that listeners can relate. And then at the end, we'll talk about how you want to make this into something to help other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I won't go through the whole from when I started to, where I got to, but what I will start with is the crux of my journey. So I'm a gay man. I've been out since I was, I think, in ninth grade, 14. So, and this was, the late 90s, early 2000s. So while it is still a very brave thing to do as a young person, back then, even more so, I was the only one in my school. And I really embraced my identity. Like I really was very proud of who I was. I was out to my parents, was out to my family. Didn't really get much pushback on it. I was very fortunate in that regard. I grew up in Los Angeles, so I wouldn't, grow up in the middle of nowhere. And when I got of age and I finally started going out in gay spaces, in nightclubs and things like that in West Hollywood, most specifically, that's when drinking culture really kind of became very glamorous and very sexy and fun. And oh my gosh, look at all the inhibitions that I can allow myself to indulge in. And so at first, as a young 21, 22, I was just kind of getting my, legs, so to speak, and learning to, we start with all the fruity cocktails and frilly cocktails. And then very early on in my 20s, I became a bartender. So I got a job as a bartender. So my life literally was all alcohol. Okay.
Sure.
And, I made a ton of friends. And it's funny because when I talk about it, I smile because it was such a fun time. And it's almost like in a movie, where I'm like, uh-oh, what's coming? You know what I mean? So I was out all the time. I had friends that were bartenders. If I wasn't at their bar, they were at my bar. But I had a lot of friends and I had a lot of community, and I was going to this party and that party and this. I was doing all the things, and it was so much fun. And then eventually, and I can't really tell you when, but eventually it went to a point where it was like I was just trying to keep the party going at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
And I would befriend just anybody who is willing to just keep it going. Just as, it's 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, whatever. We're still going to swing. And, those people became my friends, and I still had my other friends from before. But a lot of what my drinking had to do with as I got older was because a lot of the gay community, and I speak really only from my experience, but I have spoken with enough people to confidently say this is the case for many people within the LGBT community. There's such an emphasis on party culture, hookup culture, club culture, going out culture, that you really feel as if you don't do that, if you're not part of it, then what do you do? Or you're like a loser. And, and I was like, no, I'm not a loser. I'm fun. To my own detriment. I mean, I ruined birthday parties. Like, I've had people throughout the years just really say to me, like, we got a little crazy last night. But at the same time, I don't know if you had this experience, the same people that would say, oh, you got a little too wasted last night, were also the same people that like 3 days later were like, hey, we're going to happy hour. So it became such a challenge for me to reconcile, well, do I have a problem? Because they say I do, but then like 3 days later, they're inviting me back out. So at this point in my story, I'm about, I'd say right around probably my 30th birthday, where I kind of slowed things down a little bit. I got a dog. So I was like, oh, I'm a dad now. So I need to tone it down. So, but as I got into my 30s, and I'm single this whole time, no serious relationships. So at that point too, I'm like, well, where the heck am I supposed to meet, a man? Where am I supposed to, find a boyfriend? And intellectually, logically, I'm sure anybody listening to this podcast that has any sort of issues with addiction, or they're going through it with themselves or something, logic does not factor in much in our minds.
Correct.
It's just no logic. And so I was like, well, that's where I'm going to meet him. I'm going to meet him at a bar. Mm-hmm. I don't know where I got that from. So, and as you get into your 30s, this is when people in my life were having babies, getting married, moving in together. And I was still, the old queen at the bar, dancing, all night long, sloppily, or getting kicked out, or, just making a mess of myself. And so, and people were just kind of watching, and, I would hobble enough of, some sober days together. I'd do a sober October, a dry January. I'd do it long enough to convince not only myself, but the people in my life that I'm okay. I have a handle on this. And really what my problem is, and a lot of folks too may be able to, it wasn't that I couldn't function without alcohol. It wasn't like I was one of those people that I had to go, before my morning coffee, have like, a shot of vodka. It was that once I started at 5 o'clock on Friday, we were not ending until I passed out finally Sunday night at like 6 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And so it was all the stuff that I did in between that had the repercussions and everything that were the problem. So now we'll get to, how did I finally get sober? Well, there's two. You'll see in a moment, weddings play a big factor in my sobriety journey, ironically. So about 5 years ago, it was 5 years ago, I had a very good friend. Just like a sister, like one of those friends in your life that really just, you get each other's humor, you can just be yourself with. She was finally getting married. She had this big wedding planned in Florida. All of our friends were going to be there. Everyone was going to be there. It's a big wedding. We rented a huge house, everything, the whole thing. And I got there night one, totally fine. Then we got to the house on the second day, and the party started, and I don't really remember much of that weekend. And I don't know if I've chosen to forget some of it, but the parts I do remember are not great. A lot of fighting, a lot of arguing, a lot of yelling. Not at her, just at other people. Sure. And then the thing that I remember most clearly is the Sunday morning waking up, and just that knowing that everyone in the house was like super pissed at me. Wow. And that I essentially was like, well, we're going to go, I'll have a day here. You should probably go to the airport, even though your flight's not for another 8 hours. And so I got on the plane. My very last drink I ever had, which is so appropriate, was a room temperature, 2 bottles of room temperature airplane Chardonnay with ice.
Wow.
And I got home and I went to bed. And then the next morning I woke up, and I remember the day very distinctly because it was the day that the Notre Dame church in Paris was on fire. And I'm not very religious, but I looked at that as some sort of sign. So at that point, I knew I had to do something. But again, I'm in the throes of just denying that this is not something I can handle on my own. So my thought process was, well, I have pretty good health insurance. I should maybe go to an addiction specialist. I'll go to counseling. That's what I'll do. That'll be the thing that'll fix it. So I found this addiction. I had an appointment like 10 days later. So I go to this appointment. It's day 13 of my sobriety. And she's talking to me. She's great. Asking me all these questions. She's like super shocked that I just went cold turkey. She's like, did you get the shakes? I was like, no, I just stopped. And she's like, oh, wow. She's like, I've never really encountered somebody that just walks in here that's just stopped and didn't have all these stuff. I was like, I kind of do this all the time. And she was like, really? I said, yeah. And inputs her stuff in the computer. And I'll never forget, she like turns to me very abruptly and says, okay, so here's what I think you need to do. I think you need to do about a 9 to 12 month inpatient program. And yeah, exactly. And I was like, oh, no. I'm not an impatient person. You don't need to like send me away and do anything. That's not me. I'm just here to figure out why I get so mad when I drink. I want to figure out what makes me so angry. So then there was that moment of panic. And I'm really thankful that somehow I had the insight to be like, okay, she's the professional. Because, as an addict, anytime you get confronted with somebody else kind of telling you the secret that you already know, you're very like, no, that's just like I did. And then you run. I don't know if anyone ever watches the show Intervention, but it's like the second they're confronted, they're boom, out the door.
Right. Did you go?
So no, I did not go to the inpatient, but I told her, I was like, I don't think I'm an impatient person. I don't think I need to be in that structured of a program. And so she said, okay, well, let's do an 18-month outpatient. And so she gave me the structure. It was, I think I had to go to 3 of their sobriety meetings. So there's sobriety meetings, not AA meetings, because they don't follow the steps. And then I had a counseling, I think it was 1 counseling meeting a month. And then I was to be randomly screened with a urine test at any time. So
it's like accountability.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I love shit. People love this part. I got really fat. Yeah, I got really fat. And everyone's always like, oh, did you lose so much weight when you got thin? I'm like, nope, I gained about 55 pounds because I just replaced drinking with food.
Got it.
And
so transferred addictions. Yeah. Wow.
I transferred addictions. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it was so comforting to just have that in that moment. And I went crazy. Like I just ate everything. And the thing about that was so empowering eventually was that when you're in the throes of drinking or drug use, for me at least, you can see it, but you can't see it as clearly as when one day you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, there's a lot more in my face here than there used to be.
Right.
Or these clothes don't fit me the way they used to. And so through those meetings and through those those first 100 days, I really got the legwork of where the idea for queer recovery would eventually come through. So I can share a little bit now how did that come about? Because now we're about 3.5, 4 years ago. So as I mentioned at the beginning of my story, a lot of my drinking was from going out and partying and clubbing. And so fortunately, I did meet some really great people that I'm still friends with, one of which is a friend of mine who got married or was getting married in Ibiza in Spain. And he called me and he said, I really would like you to. I think I maybe lied or something at some point and said, oh, I'm an officiant. I can officiate weddings. But somewhere along the line, he got it in his head that I can officiate weddings. So he called me and he's like, I really want you to come to Ibiza and officiate my wedding. So, I mean, I'm not going to turn down a trip to Ibiza. Like, that's just not, it's not going to happen.
But you really weren't able to do that. So that wasn't really.
Oh no, I made sure I don't know. I got ordained.
Okay, good,
I was like, I'm not. Oh yes, thank you. I was like, I got ordained. I did what I needed to do. And then, about 2 months after that, he and I are talking, going over a few things, and he's like, hey, I just want to let you know, A, I'm very proud of you for your sobriety and what you're doing. Because I didn't tell. Oh, that's part I didn't share. I didn't tell anybody for about 4 months that I was getting sober or that I was sober. I didn't tell anybody.
Why
for
is
two
that?
reasons. Yeah, for two reasons. One, if I decided to start drinking again, I didn't want that to be used against me. And I want people to be like, see, look, you couldn't even look at you. You're total drunk. You couldn't even be sober for 2 months or whatever. But also, I think the other part of it was if I had a hard enough time admitting it to myself. I always likened the journey of coming out as a sober person as like when I came out of the closet as a gay man, right? Because for a long time I knew I was gay. I just wasn't quite sure how to word it. And then I finally got it. And then I came out to myself. And then I didn't come out. I mean, obviously, my friends, it was a little easier, but I didn't come out to like my family. And so, a couple years after I came out to my friends, because I just wasn't sure how to identify with being a sober person. I didn't know what that meant. Because to me, and my dad was an alcoholic, and he said, I'm a drunk. Alcoholics go to meetings. So anyway, so I'm on the phone with my friend about his wedding, and he says, there's going to be a lot of booze here. Are you okay with that? And I said, well, and he's like, I can get you, like, I can set you like the kids' table. I can do like whatever you need, but I want you to know that that's going to be. And I was like, no, it's totally fine, totally fine. Because at that point, sobriety is still very new to me. So I'm not thinking about it in that way.
Right.
So we fast forward, we go to Spain, we get there, everything's fine. And one of the things that I did do is one of my friends that I traveled with, she's not a big drinker anyway, but I was like, if I need to get myself out of a situation, I need you to just come with me, no questions asked. It's like totally fine. So that was one of the first things that, whenever anyone asks me,
yeah,
exactly. Whenever anyone's like, what do I do? I'm like, you got to get that one person, that your point person, just as you said, that if you're in a situation, get yourself out of there and that they'll go with you regardless. So he rented this villa in Ibiza and it was gorgeous and so glamorous and blah, blah, blah. And so we're there, and the next morning, everything's getting set up. And sure enough, part of the centerpieces are these very fancy bottles of tequila. And he goes, he's like, I have you sitting right in the middle of this, because he did this big family style long table. And he's like, I have you sitting right in the middle across from me. I want you as close to me as possible. But he's like, dude, the part of the wedding gifts are shot glasses. Like, he's literally just making sure that I'm so okay. It was so endearing. And I was like, no, I'm totally fine. Everything went fine. The wedding was fine. I got so many compliments. It was great. We get to the reception, and sure enough, Europeans can drink. They have a whole different relationship with alcohol than Americans do. And I actually quite admire it. And they're like, why aren't you drinking? Why aren't you drinking? Why aren't you drinking? And I was like, oh, I'm just trying this sober thing. And we have an early flight tomorrow. I was just kind of going through all these different excuses. And it was and finally later on that night, I really thought about it. And one of the things that I brand myself as is anti-AA. And I want to be clear before I jump into the rest of the story that I'm not against AA in any shape or form. It works for so many people, but there's not an alternative for those that it doesn't work for. Okay. And so when I was in Ibiza, that I have found, I should say. And when I was in Ibiza, I remember sitting there, I was like, if I was in AA, I may have had to have left this party, found a meeting, get myself there, do all these things. And for me and the way I wanted to live my life, I was like, that's just not something I really want to do. And this doesn't work for me. It's not that I don't want to have to go through all that planning and do all that legwork to stay sober. So I've got to figure out a way to own my sobriety the way that I own what hand I write with, right? Like it's just not a big deal. And that's where the first little seeds of what queer recovery would eventually become. Um, and then, of course, the pandemic happened about 5 months after that. And I had nothing to do but think about being sober.
Right.
And I celebrated my first year of sobriety the first month of lockdown. And that was very confronting too, because I was literally in the environment that I had so long struggled to avoid. I was alone in my house. I had just moved to a new city right before that trip to Spain, and I knew nobody. So I was completely alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was that. And again, if I had been really dependent, I mean, I don't know how people did it, but if I had been really dependent on a regular meeting or something, there was like 3 or 4 weeks where we didn't know what was going on before things finally got on Zoom. So it really got me again thinking, like, how do you do this on your own? Now, I'm not saying, and
Right.
we'll talk more about queer recovery in a minute, but how do you empower yourself on your own so that when these things are happening, you're solid in your sobriety without other stuff, so that the other stuff that you're doing, meetings or whatever, are complementary and almost like icing on the cake for what you're able to do for yourself. So that's the journey. And then that brings us right up to when queer recovery got started. But just to kind of round up that whole story, I had a lot of fun. I would say I had more fun during my partying days than I didn't. But the lasting effects of the not fun times is what ultimately led to me choosing sobriety, because I had wrecked so many relationships. And I mean, I've been arrested, hospitalized. I had an STD scare. I mean, I had all sorts of just huge red flags throughout the time. I've been hospitalized twice. So, but it wasn't until that wedding when I had all my friends basically be like, we just can't deal with you. We don't know who we're going to get, and it's not worth it for us anymore. That I was like, all right, we got to look at what's going on here. So that's the sobriety journey. And it's been really cool. The last 5 years has been really, really cool, kind of reintroducing myself to myself.
Let's take a moment to hear a recovery story from one of my sponsors. At the age of 25, recently married and a new father, Jack found himself in a Texas rehab facility detoxing. After 10 years of addiction, he was finally able to admit that it was time to get help. Not only did SoberLink allow him to be accountable and track his sobriety, SoberLink allowed Jack to prove to himself and others that he could make the change he had always hoped for. SoberLink is the portable sobriety tracker, taking the recovery world by storm. It has built-in facial recognition, sensors that detect cheating, and instant results sent to contacts. It's the #1 accountability tool for keeping yourself honest and rebuilding trust. Visit www.soberlink.com/sober-living and check out the show notes to click the link and receive $50 off your device today. Now back to our guest. So relatable. And, you just hit me in the heart, because I was like, wait a second, there is something with weddings. Because I am sitting here remembering, I just recently spoke to a friend I've had since the 3rd grade. But there was a period of time we didn't speak for like 10 plus years. And the very last night was at a wedding when I didn't think that I did anything so unusual, but they had a different take on that, and we have to listen to that. And I think ultimately it's like, for whatever reason, we're okay with hurting ourselves in some respect with alcohol, but when it hurts others, and I know for me, it got my attention, and I was like, wow, this isn't just about me. It's affecting other people now. And that's when I made a change. So I appreciate you being just so honest and sharing all that. It's really, really good. And so, I caught your Instagram. I've been watching it and I love it.
Mhm.
And so it's at Queer Recovery. And if you could just talk us through that, I know you are thinking about launching some things. You have some good ideas for the future. If you want to share
Yeah.
some of those now, I mean, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Queer Recovery started in the pandemic. And when I say it started in the pandemic, it was simply uh, like week 18, and I had nothing to do. And so, and I mean, we were past the foamy coffee phase. I think Tiger King was like phased out. People were over making sourdough, but it was pre-protests. So there was just really not much going on.
Right. It's a blank
And
space.
yeah, it was just a
But
blank
you know,
space.
but the pandemic, like that seriously did change a lot for everybody and how they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't show up anymore. So it forced
Yep.
people to think of alternatives. And this is where this whole thing was born. So like I'm not
Yeah.
surprised. Like it create yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. And so what I created, I mean, I called everybody, I cleaned out my closets, I'd done everything. And so finally I was just like, you know what? I need to have some sort of structure in my day. I can't just sit around and watch, reruns of old reality shows anymore. And so what I did is I created this, what I called Live at Five. And I think I stole the name from The Simpsons or something, but it started out as every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 o'clock. I would just go live on Instagram and I would just talk as I would do, as I am right now. And it was just a stream of consciousness. And the first, I think, maybe 5 or 6 of them were just me talking about sobriety and my opinions on it. And I just kind of opined. Um, and the first two was like my mom and maybe a couple friends, and that was it. But eventually I started getting 10, 12 people, and there were maybe 4 or 5 of them that would ask me questions or have say thank you for sharing. And so I was like, there's got to be something that I'm, because for me, I'm just me. I'm just talking. As I'm talking to you right now, as people are listening, I'm just talking. So when people hear things, when I get that feedback, I'm like, oh, I mean, I'm not talking right now like, oh, this is something, someone's going to get something out of this. I mean, that's my hope. And so that's how Queer Recovery was born. And I started talking about, and it was the episode, I guess I would call it, where I started talking about how AA didn't work for me. And I'll share a little bit about that because that's really how, we go back. So very long story short is I had a court-ordered AA meeting, as many of us recovering addicts may have been to in our lifetimes. Um, and I got a DUI. And I went into this meeting, and I don't remember, and I will acknowledge that I probably remember this inaccurately, but what I do remember is the feeling I was left with. And I think that's really what's important. Because I went into the meeting and somehow I was talking to somebody. And now that I think about it, it was probably one of those like those meetings for people that have like 10 plus years under their belt. So you have this, little gay party boy coming in, and he's like, I'm coming to this because I got a DUI. And this guy was like, well, you're not here for the right reasons. Now, as a person that's now 5 years sober, I can understand where that comment would come from. But at the same time, at that time, I thought to myself, well, I'm obviously here because something's put me here. I have 100,000 other things better to do than to be at an AA meeting. I would probably put paying my taxes above being in this meeting. And so for this person to then tell me that I shouldn't be there. I mean, I tell people all the time, you don't need to give an addict a reason to use. Like, we'll find it ourselves. So I just was like, screw this. I don't have to do this. And so I left. And at that moment, I was like, I don't see what's so great about these meetings if this is how I'm being treated. I mean, when I say it out loud, it's just such a selfish, self-righteous, very addict way of looking at the world.
Right.
And I've talked to so many of my friends and people that I know that are in AA, and they're like, I'm so sorry that you had that experience, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And I'm thankful that I have it because it gave me the insight to say, okay, where's the space for not only people that don't vibe with AA, but now you've got the whole LGBTQIA plus community. And when I talk to my friends in my community, the first thing that they talk about is that they don't vibe with the God aspect of AA. And they're like, I have friends that are like, I just ignore that part. Anytime God comes up, I just kind of ignore that part. And I've done I haven't done a ton of my research just yet, but I did recently find, and I think it was Russell Brand, so take this with a grain of salt, but he was talking about it's not like a Christian God. It can be whatever God you want. But that right there, for queer recovery and me, the premise is that you have to believe in God or a God, which I do. But there's those that don't. So what happens with those folks? Where do those folks go? Mm-hmm. I haven't found an answer. So I am creating queer recovery for that. Now, am I saying this is exclusively for LGBT people? No, everyone's welcome. But my philosophy is geared towards the party culture, the club culture, I have a whole series coming up that I'm working on. Not a whole series, it makes it sound like it's a TV show, but I have a series of posts for Instagram that are coming up that really dives into how advertising really focuses. We have Pride Month coming up in June. You're going to start seeing beer bottles that are rainbow. You're going to start seeing vodka bottles that have rainbows. You're going to start seeing lesbian couples on advertisements, gay couples, trans. You're going to start seeing all these different people, and they're marketing towards that. That's what they do. But you're marketing something to a group that's already at a higher risk of developing addiction. I mean, LGBT young people have I believe it's 20 to 30%. Get at me in my DMs if I'm wrong. Have a 20% to 30% higher rate of addiction than non-LGBT young people. So there's a higher risk. We're pushing it towards my community more, and there's not an alternative. And when there's not an alternative, people just do nothing, I find, because people believe that it's hard to be sober. And I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's not insurmountable. There are things that are way harder to do. And if you go into something saying, oh, this is so hard, I can't do this, well, guess what? You can't. So that's where I'm coming along. And, my whole purpose and as you've said as much, I want sobriety to be fun. It's a serious subject, but it's fun. You can have fun. You don't have to completely lose yourself. Sobriety is not getting a lobotomy. It's about enjoying your life. And again, as I said, I was just at a wedding this last weekend and I had a blast. And I always joke, I'm like, I am so much more funny now that I'm sober because they're all drinking. And I just say whatever. And they're like, you are hilarious. You are so funny. And I'm like, this is my B material. So, and so where I'm at right now, that your audience knows that I'm in the very beginning. So we're when I say I am creating content. I'm getting my voice out there. That's why I'm here speaking with you today. I'm out there really sharing who I am and what I'm up to with the world. And eventually we're going to be, and I'm saying eventually within the next probably 6 weeks, we're going to be launching coaching as the business. I'm going to be taking on clients. I am going to be looking for a few more what I'm calling beta clients, people where I'm testing out my program so that I can see what really works. I want to include a group aspect to it, which I know is so funny because I'm like so anti-AA. What about meetings? But it's the same but different. Eventually, we're going to do retreats, and I'm looking at having a podcast too because, as you can see, I can be very long-winded, and I think being able to just talk is going to be a really powerful platform. Which, if I do choose to do that, I'd love to have you on. But that's queer recovery. It's about embracing sobriety, enjoying it. There's no disappearing the shame. I always tell people that the hashtag for queer recovery is sober not vegan, which I was a vegan for 3 years. It's sober not vegan because there's a joke. I don't know if you ever heard, but it goes, have you ever met a vegan? No, don't worry, they'll tell you. And so with sobriety, at this wedding, and with this wedding I was at this weekend, people are like, we don't seem sober. And and as I said before, my journey of sobriety and my journey of my queerness and being gay has been very similar, because I remember people say, "You don't seem like a gay person to me." And it's funny because I know what people mean when they say things like that. I can't explain it, but I know what they mean. And I take that as a compliment. Like I told people, they're like, "Oh, you're at this wedding, but you were talking to the bartender. You helped setting the bar up." And I was like, "I was a bartender for 12 years. And I know what to do. I'm good at it."
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, "But you're fine handling alcohol?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can absolutely handle the booze and get it all set up." I go, I handle dog food. I'm able to like get my dog's food ready. I don't have anything about that. And so, like I said, just to kind of recap, we're starting the new stuff. We are getting the brand going. Eventually, we're going to probably do a podcast, retreats, coaching. And then eventually the thing that I'm like really excited out of all of this is eventually I'm going to start offering coaching and programs for families. And by that, I mean, if you're the mother of an addict or the son of an addict or the cousin or somebody or dating an addict, like, how do you interact with them? How do you deal with them? How do you support them? Because a lot of folks don't know, and they think, and I say this as a child of an addict, they think that getting mad at them is going to be the thing that makes the difference. Or they think that, as long as they're in my house and they're using my house, then that's safe. And there's a yes and no to that, but I'm here to give them the support that they need for that too. And I'm going to eventually start getting that on my Instagram too. But that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I didn't interrupt you once because I really loved your story. I think you're so authentic, and like I said, I love what you're doing out there in the Instagram world. That's where I see you.
Yeah.
And I grew up very traditional, which then turned very modern in my 20s and 30s. There was a real shift in my family. And, I just have such a heart I believe that, there has to be spaces for like-minded people to come together and to support one another. So, I think there's a real need for this, and I am 100% behind what you're doing. I think it's great. So, the more you can get out there and like survey your people, see what they see what your Instagram followers want. Like, seeing as you're just launching this, we've talked pre-record and you have it all laid out and everything's in place, but you have some really incredible ideas for the future, and just like, putting it out there to your followers and stuff will really give you some good feedback on what they would want the most,
Right.
So, I think you're coming from such a genuine place. And the fun factor is what I love too. One of the highest listened to episodes on my podcast was when somebody spoke about having fun in sobriety and that we don't get sober to not, and to really just like treat yourself, and to often, we often spent so much money and in the lifestyle that we previously led on things that led us down the wrong path, to not limit yourself and to use those finances for things, that are going in the right direction. And so I wish you all the success in the world, and I'll be watching. If you could just let people know where they can find you during the week.
Yeah. So on all platforms, on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, I'm at Queer Recovery, QUEERRECOVERY. And Instagram and Threads is where I'm really active right now. And then eventually anything I launch will be directly through there. So if you want to know what's going on, where I'm at, what's to come, Instagram and Threads is where I'm at right now. So
great. Yeah. And so if we could just end on, if you have anything, one sentence or one line that you could say to anyone who is struggling and would like to they're not finding themselves resonating with any other sobriety groups. They're having trouble, they're struggling, they want to jump off. What do you say to them? You've got this and you can do it. Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Jessica, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastipanovic.com.